How exactly did Hank Pym kill Tony Stark in What If? What could have happened to Tony on that zombie-infested bridge? What went through his body at the end of Endgame? And which of his deaths was the worst? The answers to these and other curious questions about our old friend Tony Stark in today's video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support the video with your activity. This is very important to me.
What'd she just do to me?
It's not a cure. It abates the symptoms.
You okay?
Leaving the donut that day and in that universe wasn't the best decision for Tony. The lithium dioxide injection, which was supposed to relieve his palladium poisoning symptoms, led to his sudden death. At first, Fury suspected that the antidote had been swapped for some kind of poison. After Barton's death, Coulson had a similar theory, suggesting cyanide might have been the cause, but they never drew a direct connection between how Stark and Barton were killed. Cyanide works by causing oxygen deprivation in the body's tissues, leading to some pretty grim consequences. And Tony's death throes looked a lot like classic cyanide poisoning symptoms. Later, we learned that the antidote was never tampered with. In fact, it never even left the syringe. The real culprit was a deranged version of Hank Pym, who was out for revenge and decided to wipe out the future Avengers before they could even come together. Figuring out how Stark and Barton actually died wasn't easy for Fury. Pym's method of attacking their bodies from the inside left behind damage that, while devastating, was hard to detect. Unlike the Hulk, they were just regular humans, much easier to kill. If you look up the most common causes of sudden or near-instant death, medical sources will usually point to either heart failure or a shutdown of cerebral function. Basically, brain failure, which makes sense. In the latter case, the most critical injuries tend to be those affecting the brainstem and thalamus. Gunshot wounds or deep penetrating injuries to these areas have an extremely low survival rate. By entering Stark's body through his neck, Pym gained access to his bloodstream, which meant he could attack any part of his brain. The brain's respiratory center, which is one of the main causes of sudden death, controls the breathing muscles. According to Wikipedia, our lungs can't expand and contract on their own. They rely on those muscles to function, and in Tony's final moments, he clearly struggled to breathe. The cardiovascular center of the brain regulates heart rate, controlling how much blood and oxygen reach the body's tissues. By damaging just these two vital structures, or even just one of them, Pym could have caused a relatively quick but still agonizing death for both Stark and Barton. It's worth noting that in real life, Tony probably would have suffered for much longer before losing consciousness.
The difference between you and me, that you can't see the difference between you and me.
In this universe, the era of Iron Man never came to be, but a villain got a new chance. Tony engages in aggressive negotiations with Killmonger, trying to find justice. The attempt fails, and Killmonger first immobilizes Tony by pinning him to a wall with a Wakandan spear, striking near his right collarbone. And this is one of Stark's strangest deaths because Killmonger finishes him off by driving the spear even deeper, even though there aren't any vital organs in that area. He could have died from massive blood loss if a major artery had been hit, but that seems unlikely since his death happened so quickly. Killmonger only used the knife to carve another mark on his body. This scene lacks a proper finishing blow from Killmonger, like the one he gave Rhodey. When he took T'Challa's gauntlet, he struck directly into the heart, skillfully bypassing the rib cage. Depending on the force of impact and the extent of heart damage, the time a victim spends suffering before losing consciousness can vary. In some cases, it can last minutes, but Rhodey's suffering ended quickly. As for Tony, he dies here simply because the story needed him to. Without a doubt, this is one of Stark's strangest deaths. Like many well-known disasters, this zombie apocalypse mess started in a place of love and hope, and it may have led to one of Tony Stark's most agonizing deaths, but that's not a fact, just a guess. We saw Hope's transformation, which, unlike most others, took hours. The speed of infection seems to depend on how much zombie pathogen enters the body. Her transformation, like in many zombie adaptations, wasn't physically painful. In these cases, the focus is more on the psychological horror. When I talk about what might be Stark's worst death, I don't mean the process of turning into a zombie itself. I mean what usually comes right before that, one of humanity's oldest fears, being eaten alive and torn apart by a pack of predators. Well, partially torn apart and partially eaten. Sometimes it might seem like the transformation happens too fast for the victims to feel anything, but zombies don't attack their own. which means that as long as the Horde was still tearing into Cap, he was technically still human, still conscious. The best thing that could have happened to him, and to anyone else in that situation, was passing out from shock before the real horror set in. What exactly happened to Tony on that bridge? We don't know. T'Challa, for example, somehow survived long enough to be kept as food for zombie Wanda, gradually losing his limbs. Not the best fate either. Tony's armor and its mobility should have given him a much better chance than Cap or the others. But again, who knows? What if his suit just couldn't withstand the sheer number of enemies? What if its last bit of power was only keeping his half-eaten body together? If things on that bridge played out that way, then Tony Stark's death here might just be the worst one of all. At least, in my opinion.
You can rest now.
In this universe, Tony was destined to take on the role of a hero and find himself through the path of self-sacrifice, or rather, through the culmination of that path, by making the one snap that saved everyone but doomed him. I don't want to overanalyze this moment too much, so let's just call it a search for some kind of rational meaning. Everything in this scene is built around drama, and it works perfectly. Banner laid out the core idea. The biggest physical danger for anyone wearing the gauntlet is radiation exposure, primarily gamma radiation, which, in the case of the snap, reaches unimaginable levels. We actually saw a similar kind of death for Stark in episode 8 of What If, death from an overwhelming energy surge. So I didn't see much point in analyzing it separately. Gamma radiation is the most dangerous form of radiation for living beings. It has extreme penetrating power, and shielding against it is incredibly difficult. For a comparison, you've probably heard of acute radiation syndrome, the destruction of the body's systems at the cellular level. In the Avengers, 2012, Tony told Banner, who had been exposed to gamma radiation in his experiments, that no one survives that much exposure. The only reason he's still alive is because the Hulk is literally keeping him that way. In that sense, no one was better suited for the snap than Banner. Tony did design some radiation protection into his final suit. You can even see it absorbing part of the damage. But preventing fatal damage from a surge of energy like that, even a relatively contained one, was impossible. What's interesting is that despite having all the conditions for developing severe radiation sickness, Thanos says, "I nearly died," implying that he wasn't still actively dying from it. This suggests that the snap's damage happens all at once, right there in the moment. It's also accompanied by an extreme heat release, literally cooking the wearer from the inside, burning his arm and spreading to parts of his neck and face on the same side as the gauntlet. When Rocket flips over Thanos' severed forearm, we see that the gauntlet had fused into his flesh, becoming part of him. Unlike the other gauntlet users, Tony was human. Those critical burns could have easily reached his internal organs as well. At the moment of his death, though, Tony wasn't suffering. The filmmakers didn't want his final moments to be painful for him. He could have died almost instantly. And in a way, the universe gave him those last few seconds so he could spend them with his friends and loved ones, and they with him. But one way or another, Tony Stark's story isn't just the story of his death. It's the story of a man who always found a way, even when the price was his own life. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment. And don't forget to share it with your friends. See you next time.